Hi everyone, welcome to a new episode of The Pivot of Change. Today my guest is Julia, and she's a beacon for trauma recovery, healing and empowerment, and also really focuses on empowerment within our relationships. We'll also dive deeper in later on. And she spent over 10 years working with children, and she now also has working several years coaching and counseling with adults. And she kind of blends leadership work, somatic therapy, parts work, Teal Swan's completion process, and much more to achieve life-changing results. And she helps people to connect with their own inner child and provides a really safe process to feel old wounds, and so they can come out of the other side and feel a lot lighter and a lot more playful, so people can enjoy life again. And I'm really happy to have you here today, Julia.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you so much, Sanne, for inviting me on.
Yeah. So what kind of inspired you to go into the field of trauma recovery and really helping people heal on a deep emotional level?
Yeah, I mean, I really resonate with the wounded healer archetype, and I could probably go on a long monologue and talk for like 20 minutes about everything, but you know, the truth is that it was my own, my own healing journey and my own pain and painful circumstances and recovery process that led me to basically accidentally falling into the role of a healer. It was just kind of a step-by-step process. It's not something I thought out and thought, oh, I think I'll be a coach, or I'll be a healer. It's just the way that things happened, walking through the doors that were opening and walking away from the ones that shut. I kind of wound up here, but to kind of nutshell it, I had a really really challenging childhood, and I grew up with the influence of an Eastern cult that my parents were involved in. And I also grew up in a family of incest and experienced a lot of really horrific abuse, over a couple of decades, really. I became an alcoholic and an addict, and I also struggled with an eating disorder, since the age of 8, actually. So it was like a lot of years of being really in it in terms of my own trauma and my own pain. And as I got sober when I was 23, cleaned up from drugs, and really got into a place where, okay, I want to take some power and some personal ownership in my situation. I want to get better. I'm choosing that for myself. That was what happened when I was 23, and I got sober from drugs and alcohol. Since then, it's been therapy, 12 steps, somatic therapy, all kinds of things. Relationships actually catalyzed me tremendously, romantic relationships especially, and that's when I really started looking at my inner child and doing this kind of work that I'm doing now with the inner child, because all the patterns were coming up around the relationships, even when other areas of my life I was experiencing relative healing in. And I received some incredible mentorship from some people, including Mel Brand of the Gold Ray Twin Flames, and Teal Swan, whom we mutually know. And I started taking clients sort of on the side, and that work really just resonated with me, because at the time I was studying child development and I was in nannying, and I had been a preschool teacher for many years. So it just kind of all came together, bridging psychology, metaphysics and spirituality, all these different inner child work, and mentorship, addiction recovery, that sort of thing. It just kind of all blended and started helping people, and it just kind of grew. It took off, and now I'm really, really blessed and fortunate to have a business where I get to help people walk through some of the same challenges that I walked through. And that makes it feel like it all makes sense to me, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So when you were like 23, you completely cut out like the addictions in your life. So what you said also with alcohol and drugs, what kind of inspired you to make that shift? What kind of inspired that like pivotal moment that everything turned around for you?
I guess that's the name of your podcast, huh? So,
Yeah.
I really wish I could say that it was like I was, I had some experience where, again, like I was like, I think this is what I want to do, or this is what I need to do. And it was like a clear decision and I made it happen for myself. That's not how it happened. It was more like, I feel like I've experienced a lot of grace on my journey, meaning like forces kind of carrying me through to the next thing. It's almost like no matter what I did, I couldn't F it up. Cause like I was always, felt like, kind of held and protected and brought to the next leg of the journey. So basically I was using heroin at the time. I was 23, strung out on heroin, couldn't keep the job, living at home, drinking, binging and purging. I'm a type 1 diabetic as well. So I was winding up in the hospital quite frequently. I had multiple suicide attempts. And so I was really, I was not functioning at all. And essentially I received an ultimatum and I had run out of drugs. It's like, most addicts will tell you like that feeling when you're just like, you don't have what you need and you don't want to go through withdrawals, but you can't face another day of kind of doing what you're doing to try to just, get what you need, because it's a full-time job. And so I was feeling that way. And I got this ultimatum basically from my family where they were like, you're going to have to go elsewhere. Like you can go on the streets or you can go to rehab and we'll pay for you. And that's what happened. I mean, they didn't pay, the insurance paid, but so I rolled into this rehab in California, no frills, kind of like a big house with like 15 people or so. And that's where things really started to shift for me.
Yeah, it must be really hard to go through that. And I think it's amazing that you fully recovered from it and that you still got those addictions out, because we know that especially with some of the addictions you mentioned, that actually the percentage of people staying off an addiction is like shocking low.
Yes, it is. It is.
And of course that also signifies that a lot of things need to change because a lot of things aren't working. And what do you think that helped you to come off the addictions? Was it going more into the root of your pain, or what was it for you?
Initially, no, that wasn't the case for me. What actually helped me, and you might resonate with this, especially because you're real familiar with Teal Swan's work, but it was the element of community and connection. So being in a rehab and connecting with other people who had the same problem, going to 12-step meetings and connecting with communities of people who had the same problem. And not only that, but they were actively working on it to try to better themselves and heal and change. And they were showing up for me and showing up for one another. I don't know any other place on the planet, honestly, other than 12-step groups, where there's that kind of support, and it's free. And it's like, I had people, my sponsor, she came and visited me every week at that rehab. It's like a mentor who works one-on-one with you in a 12-step program. So she came every week, every Sunday on Visitor's Day, and did some work with me. She drove me to job interviews. She drove me to meetings. She people really showed up for me. I had long lists of people, you're at a meeting and people come up and give you their phone number and say, call me, and they really mean it. So I had long lists of people that I could call when I needed help with anything, or when I wasn't feeling okay, and when I felt like I wanted to drink or I wanted to use, so that resource of connection and that feeling of belonging, that was what it really was for me. And then that provided a foundation, because too, it's like, you've got to get the drugs out of your system, you've got to get your brain and your body more stabilized. And then you can start to really dive into some of the deeper stuff. And I did that mostly through therapy and stuff like that.
Okay, and that came after more as well. But I think it's really powerful that you say that, because I truly feel, and now of course there are way more people actually talking about it, that most addictions are created in isolation. And
100%.
And sometimes it's even with other people, but within that group, you feel so alone. And that I feel like for every addiction, for me, when I was struggling with addictions as well, for a long time I was trying doing inner work and healing, but I couldn't really get over it until I started working with a practitioner that was with me. And
Yes.
then I realized the power of connection and support that's needed. And it's not just about someone's expertise or someone's knowledge about the subject. Of course, that can help a lot. But the most powerful thing, I think, is connection, and knowing that you're not alone, and that other people are going through the same thing as well. And I think otherwise there's a lot of shame around it as well. So it can be difficult for people to actually open up.
Yes, absolutely. I think it's both, you know, exactly what you said, the isolation and the shame. Those are like kind of the evil twins that characterize addictive cycles. You know, it's like we isolate, and then and we, you know, do whatever we do, we feel shame, and so we isolate more, you know. So when we're around people, not only, like, I mean, it's helpful to have all kinds of support, right? So professional support is great, but I also have found that, you know, finding support or finding communities or connections with people who have the same issue as you, you know, or who have been through the same experience as you, so you can feel really safe and comfortable exposing those vulnerable parts. You know, like, I'm not proud of a lot of the stuff I did. I don't know about you, but it's like when you're really, you know, you're really in it, we're not doing the stuff that's really in integrity, and it causes us to isolate more and keep secrets and feel even more alone. And I was just the type you described about feeling alone, even in interaction with people. I was really social, actually, and nobody would have probably characterized me as lonely, because I actually coped the opposite way. I would be the center of attention kind of thing, and really to kind of charm everybody in the room and like present an image. But like just behind that, you know, there was this desperate, crying little girl who nobody saw.
Yeah. And I also was listening a little while back to the work of Gabor Mate, and what he also said, that it all addictive behavior and all these things start from a disconnection with self. So a disconnection with your true self. And of course, you know, it's as well that trauma can actually trigger that. So we actually fragment why. So it's always internal as well. And because it's so internal, that even though we are connected, we're in a room with other people, we can still feel so alone, because you can have this feeling that no one truly sees you for who you are. And I think that are like the powerful connections that make you heal, that people see you for who you are, and also they don't expect something from you, or they don't, you know, a lot of times we can, when we start playing, this is what I figured out as well, is when you start playing a role and do subconsciously, and you just said the fun girl that's really outgoing, and because that's the thing that you think, oh, then I'll be loved and I'll be liked by other people, but then people kind of start liking you for that persona and not the whole you, and then you figure, and then it's not the other people that are to blame, everything but it's that you're disconnected from yourself. And I think that's the downside to the process of socialization, that we kind of repeat the patterns and behaviors that make us feel liked and loved. And
Yes, yeah. And then ironically, you know, exactly what you said, ironically, we feel less loved. We end up feeling less loved. You know, for me, the transaction, or how I sort of felt like I was earning love or approval or affection from people, was also my appearance. So it was all things that weren't really my true. It wasn't about my core. It wasn't about my insides. It wasn't about how I felt or how I authentically thought or who I authentically was. It wasn't about my essence, my truth. It was about my body, my sexuality, my face, and my sweetness and my kindness, or my whatever role I was playing, right? And that shifted. It was like, at a certain point in time, it was like I was, I don't know, the really good student. And then I was like, the sexy girlfriend. And then I was like, preschool teacher Julia, who was like so cheerful and cute, and like, oh, she works with kids. That's so, she's so sweet and loving. Like, I mean, and like, it's not like all of that is inauthentic, but also I was a lot of other things. And I swallowed the way that I felt constantly. Swallowing, grinning my teeth like baring my teeth like an animal, grinning like inside. It was more like, ah! And that's actually I've found to be the number one cause of bulimia and anorexia.
So that it's like type of suppression of the emotion, of like negative emotion.
Yeah, and the double reality, like nobody can see me, and I'm alone in my experience inside, and I don't get to express how I really feel. I literally don't even have that right or capacity. It's like an internal sort of prison. Yeah, but I think we can definitely break out of that. What was that process like for you? I'm curious around your addiction recovery, because it's the way I did.
Yeah, so for me, it wasn't like extremely, it had a really big impact on my life. So for me, it was mainly smoking. So smoking cigarettes, smoking a lot of weed. I had a really marijuana addiction, and it really started from a very early age with me. So it was always kind of intertwined with my life. I think I already started around 13, 14 years old. And food for me as well. So it was a lot of overeating. So it was mainly like really numbing out. But also the thing was for me that like most of my addiction was in groups, actually. And that's why at the time I wouldn't even see it as an addiction, So because you're surrounded by other people and you're doing it, and somehow you also like it and you're having fun. But and I always believe it's not really the substance you're addicted to, it's your relationship with it. And at least that's how I experienced it, especially with marijuana, because I do truly believe it's a very powerful plant and there's nothing wrong with it. Some people may view it, but for me it was, I think, this feeling of being alone and being unsupported. And for me it was really, I also had severe anxiety. So and then when I was really young, I just found out that smoking a weed, it helped. I no longer had that I kind of finally had control over it, because I knew if I would stressed out or anxious, I would smoke a cigarette or I would smoke weed, and then I really became dependent on all these things. And I had like a really bad lifestyle. So a lot of drinking as well. For me, that was mainly socially. So a lot of drinking, and it wasn't seen as that because people around me were all drinking a lot. So then when you kind of step outside of that and you see it more from an observer perspective, then you can see it. So for me, no one would have seen me as the typical addict or anything like it. Probably people close to me would be like, okay, she's maybe doing it a little bit too much, everything. But and what actually helped me, so for me it was when I was 18 years old, I had a heart attack, and that was really the moment where things shifted for me. So then I stopped smoking cigarettes for a while. Also fell back, had a lot of relapses with smoking as well. So for me, it really was like the spiral for me. So you stop with something, and then you kind of feel like you're coming back to it. So, and that continued. So it just became less and less. And so it really inspired me to live a healthier lifestyle. And and then it came to the point where I actually realized I already stopped smoking most of it. Then I realized I needed help with it as well, because when I started stopping, my anxiety started resurfacing, right? Because that was the thing I was suppressing. So that came up, and then I realized that I needed help. So I reached out to a practitioner, actually, who works with the completion process, so with trauma recovery. And the crazy thing was, within one session, the next day I tried to smoke, and I was like, I cannot do it anymore.
Wow.
Crazy. It was. And yeah, the reason why I went into the session was actually for my anxiety, so it wasn't even focused towards addiction as well. But then I could really lay the connection. So it's really what you're covering up, and when you resolve the pain that you're covering up, that's when I found that out. It's really about what's underneath. And
yeah, always. Thank you so much for sharing that. I loved hearing about your journey with that, and I loved what you said about the addiction being to the relationship you have with the substance or behavior, you know. And sometimes it's really overt, like it has been with me in the past, and sometimes it's more covert. But it's like, you know, the substance or behavior is a solution to the problem, not a problem itself, not the problem itself. And when you remove the solution, ding, 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 up pops the problem, you know. Oh my God, I have like insane rage attacks. I'm really fucking angry, and I don't know if it's okay to curse on your show.
Yeah, it's for me, I curse. I
don't know. Like, I'm really rageful. I want to actually kill someone, and that's what I was, you know, smoking behind. Or like I have all this grief that's coming up. I just can't even get out of bed. I'm so depressed. I was using stimulants to cover that up or whatever. And you know, I think it's no, you know, coincidence that, you know, you use the word relationship to talk about, you know, the substance. And we also said that connection is like the antidote, in a sense, or, you know, not doing it alone. And we try to, because we also have that shame. We have this belief that it's like, I have to fix it all by myself. I have to fix it all by myself. I should know what to do. It's like, no, if you knew how to do that, you probably would have done that the first time you really realized that you probably shouldn't be smoking. You know what I mean? You would have just figured out a way and done it, but we need help, you know? And so once we give up the relationship, like for me, food was my best friend when I was little. It was the only relationship that I could count on. I took food to bed with me when I was 4 years old to tuck me in at night, because that's how much of a loving, you know, soothing relationship I had to it. Cigarettes, for me, same thing, 13, 14 years old. I started smoking, and cigarettes were always there for me. I actually wrote a breakup letter to cigarettes when I quit smoking, and I burned it in a dumpster fire. Don't tell anyone. I don't know if that's legal, but I did that, you know, and sometimes I talk about like breaking up with, you know, the substance or the thing, because it is like that, right? It's like a relationship, and there's grief there too. There can be a lot of grief, but when we're releasing that, we're actually opening up the space for what we really need, which is fulfillment in human connection, closeness, intimacy, companionship, love.
Yeah. I think that's why it's so important to become aware of what you're actually getting out of the addiction, because a lot of times you see addiction as something that's bad. You know, so many judgments about it, but it is serving you in some way, and it's helping you. And I think it's also to not, I think that's what I realized a lot myself, and also working with clients, that a lot of times we can blame ourselves from who we used to be and our old behavior, and then you think like, why was I doing all of that, you know? And then it's really, I think, important to be compassionate towards yourself. Like, that's what you needed at the time. That was for you, it was survival. For me, it was for you, it was the only way to deal with your anxiety at the time. And you did the best that you could, right? And
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think we're always doing the best that we could. And I like to say that there's no part of you that does not love you, because that's been my experience when I've gone into these inner children or these perspectives of that part of me that was an addict, the part of me that tried to kill myself, even the part of me that cut myself, the part of me that, you know, was in all these terrible relationships. It's like all I was ever trying to do was get a need met, stay safe, or be loved. And those are high priorities for me. You know what I mean? So those parts of me are working for me. I actually spent a year of my like bulimia recovery in process of really allowing myself to do the behavior and practicing loving myself anyway until I could stop. It was one of the most profound experiences for me because, you know, this I do have kind of an issue with a lot of mainstream addiction recovery approaches now, and you know, I didn't used to see it as so problematic, but when we make an enemy of, you know, our disease, that's what they call it kind of in 12-step language, our disease, the addiction. Or like there's a woman named Jenny Schaefer, she wrote a book called Life Without Ed, and it's like about disidentifying from and disobeying your eating disorder. So it's a kind of a disidentification and almost like a part of you that contains that eating disorder. But the approach is to push it away. The approach is to cut it out like it's a cancer, out. And that's the opposite of love. Like, you know that, you know. And so what we end up with is like less of an experience of wholeness in our embodiment and more of an experience of shame for parts of us and regret, you know. So I love what you said about that.
Yeah, and a lot of times we see and label something, a part of us, as bad, right? And usually it's how other people perceive that. And it's also because that part of you didn't get its needs met. So it starts to act in those ways, like addictive or doing self-harming behavior in order to get its needs met. And I think it's very important to understand that if that part of you would actually be loved and feel safe and get the attention it needs, it will transform into something really positive for you. So what I realized that I actually, because I wanted to change and transform and to put my life on the right path, I kind of realized that I abandoned my rebel. I abandoned my inner rebel that was like, fuck this shit. I was in school, I'm gonna do whatever I want, I don't care. I just smoke weed all day. But that was how I was behaving at the time. But actually, I realized that's kind of the part of me that's really fearless. And it's like, I don't care what other people think about me. And I can do whatever I want to do, you know, and I'm not going to let people bring me down. I'm standing up for myself. And actually now it's a very healthy part of me. And
I love that.
And when I suppressed it, I always felt there's something missing, you know, there's something missing. I'm not fully
because there was, or there is if you're suppressing that. I feel so similarly actually with the part of me that I have reclaimed that is my bulimia, because you know, what you're describing, it's like that part of me, that rebel part that, like, you know, is just like, fuck you guys, I do what I want. Like, that's the part of you that contains your boundaries and a lot of your personal power. Like, I can feel that. And a lot of times for people, that's teenage years. And I do a lot of teen self-work with people. And I focus on that a lot myself, like for a lot of these reasons. I mean, we're not allowed to develop that sense of independence and autonomy. Basically, your toddler phase, this is my child development, like human development stuff coming out. But, you know, your toddler phase where you're individuating, differentiating, discovering your boundaries, what are your yeses and your nos, exploring, what do I like, what do I not like, who am I? That kind of circles back around in adolescence, and it's healthy to go through it. But what happens instead is that we get controlled. You know, we get told, no, you have to do it this way. No, that's bad. No, you have to be in school at this time and leave at this time and do your homework and don't talk back and whatever else, you know, you're fed based on your cultural conditioning. And so, you know, if we cut off from that part of ourselves, like, I'm cut off from all that gold, man. Like for me, the bulimia was the part of me that knew the truth. That was actually what it was. And the part of me that said, fuck this shit. I am not buying it. I'm not buying into this gaslighting. I'm not buying into this double reality. This fucking cult my parents took me to is creepy. I want no part of it. I'm not wrong. Dad did do these things to me. You know? So if I was to just completely separate from that aspect of myself, I would have been cut off from all that power and truth. Also, I don't know even how effective that would be long term in terms of keeping up with my recovery, because the need wouldn't be met, and so I would probably go back to the behavior. Does that make sense?
Yeah, because I think that's why actually the recovery percentages, and I spoke before about addiction, but also with eating disorders and a lot of other things, it's still pretty low, because people perceive the illness, the mental condition they're in, or the addiction is the bad thing, right?
Yes.
So, and if that means they're bad and they're doing something bad.
We're constantly against ourselves if we're in that type of place with things. And that's not a way to live. I mean, I've known people with 25, 35 years of sobriety who have put a bullet in their head because they never really were able to get to that core and find their compass, you know, to move forward in a different way, you know, because they're always fighting inside. That's a little bit of a not so feel good.
Yeah, but it is
but
something that happened. Yeah. And that may, for some people, maybe extreme example, but it is something real, right?
Yeah.
And yeah. And what I also think was really important that you said more in the beginning is how actually relationships helped you. So it helped you in your recovery, and why that is so important. So how could you maybe share your thoughts and experiences of how that worked for you? So your healing and your development within the relationships you had.
Yeah. Well, you know, I'm really grateful for that question. And it's interesting to reflect on everything that we've been talking about and then to kind of go there. You know, I think in the beginning of my recovery, like it was a really slow process for me of beginning to open up and trust. And it mirrored the very slow process for me of being able to open up and trust me on the inside, connect with me, because I was really freaking damaged. You know, that relationship with myself was so damaged. The relationships in my childhood were so scary. It was like I needed to take little baby steps. But, you know, when your back is up against the wall, like you're trying to get clean from heroin and you don't know, you know, like you don't know how you're going to do it. You have to let people support you. So I did it even when it was uncomfortable. And I made the phone calls even though I didn't want to, you know, but it was a while before it started to feel more fluid or safe for me. For a long time, it still didn't feel good. It felt better, but not really good. And I always had a primary relationship, like a love relationship. I would actually characterize myself as a recovering love addict. So I was always I was like one after the other. Like I could not be single for like 2.8 seconds without like, I always describe it to people like when I was single, it felt like I was holding my breath underwater. Like someone was holding my head underwater, holding my breath, because it was like so uncomfortable. Being in a relationship was how I felt safe. It also gave me, you know, hits of dopamine or whatever for my brain, helped me feel not alone. And it was safe to me because there was a transaction that I was familiar with. I'm going to give you my body and, you know, I'm going to be sweet to you and you can show me off like a little trophy. And you're going to give me the security and the safety and the validation and the approval that I need. That was the only way I knew how to do relationships. It's really sad. That was literally the only way I knew how to do it. And girlfriends, it was like, so hard. It's been a huge thing for me because of my relationship with my mother, learning how to be around women. A big thing that helped was number one, somatic experiencing. So getting into my body. I did that for 2 years. Every week I went to a somatic therapist. That really helped in terms of being able to regulate my nervous system and be around other people when I was like bringing more of me into the interaction, not dissociating so much. So that was kind of one thing. The completion process, and really working hard on my attachment style, because what ended up happening was I got into a relationship with someone that I was really deeply in love with, and vice versa. It was very toxic. I don't know if you have looked around at all the like twin flame craze that's going on right now, but it was kind of like one of those, like explosive, amazing, passionate, wonderful. Also, we triggered the hell out of each other and brought out patterns like you wouldn't believe. It was just so intense. And I was in that cycle with him for about 4 years. I didn't understand what was happening. I didn't understand what was going on. So I did get help from several people, a couple of whom I mentioned. And I started to work on my attachment trauma. And then when I when I was trained in the completion process in November of 2015, so like 3.5 years ago now, I really started to discover some of the blocks that I had to intimacy, and I started to melt through them, and I found a community of people who really got me. It was kind of like I was like a round peg trying to fit in a square hole kind of thing, or a square peg in a round hole. Like before, it was like it just wouldn't quite fit. Like there's something I just don't really get you, and you just don't really get me. And it was like I found my people. I feel like I was a vibrational match to that situation because of all the work that I did on my early attachment trauma, and because of that initial relationship with a therapist. That's why I always recommend that people, see someone one-on-one and get some mentorship and work on that relationship like you had with your practitioner. It's like a different kind of relationship, and really seeing that somebody can show up for you and hold space for you, and you can be authentic, and it's safe. It's safe. So so I really dove deep into some work with friendships and doing work around our attachment styles, and sort of like being really vulnerable and authentic about how we were feeling and what's going, like what are the urges, like I want to push you away right now, or I'm really anxious because you didn't respond to my last text and I have an inner child that's freaking out, and kind of doing that work together. And then I was a match to like an incredible relationship with a partner. And I do a lot of work with him around intimacy and vulnerability. He's shown me a lot about the divine masculine and support. And I'm also working, I have a little community here in Portland, and I'm working with some of my female friends to heal my relationships with women and just feel safer. And it is like that. It's actually the first night that I moved in to our new home with our community. I was lying in bed next to my partner, Antoine, and I just started bawling. And he was like, "What's going on?" And I was just like, "I'm safe." And it makes me want to cry just like to say it again. But it was like I really internalized like the people that I'm around now, connections that I have, they're all with people who aren't going to hurt me. So the work that I do with individuals, what I found is that, like you said, even the relationship to the drug or the alcohol or the food, or the relationship to your body, to money, to your sexuality, whatever it is, it all comes down to relationships. And when we start to heal in the area of relationships in our life, we experience healing in sort of all other areas. That's what it has been like for me. Focusing on that area has just like boom, 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 boom. All the other things, it's like suddenly I don't need to cope in the same ways anymore. Suddenly I feel supported enough to like generate financial income and actually go out there and do my business because I feel safe and confident and supported and encouraged and upheld and uplifted. I'm not doing life alone anymore. Suddenly I feel like I can be a little bit more loving to my body because I have like, I have a model for what that looks and feels like in my loving relationships with others. So I'm not sure if that was what you were looking for. That's kind of a long-winded
Yeah, no, no,
diatribe.
because no,
I
it
love
was,
talking.
yeah, it's wonderful to listen to, because she really explained kind of how that evolved, and that it can also be, especially in the beginning, a more slow process. And I think that's
Yes,
okay too,
so
right? That
important for
because there are a lot of parts of you that it's freaking scary to be in a
very.
relationship or to have a friendship. So at first, like I always say, before it dives in, at first it should dip its toes in the water, then walk a little bit further before it can actually then swim a little, before it actually goes underwater. Like, because that's what you're doing when you have a relationship with someone. You're really diving in, right? And it can
Yes.
sometimes be scary, and even with friendships. And I really loved it that you mentioned it, that for me, actually, female relationships is like the scariest thing. And that's what I
Yeah.
recently discovered. And also with another friend who also does like the same kind of work. And we were talking, it's like, that's really like feminine friendship. Like, to be honest, that shit still freaks me out a
Oh,
little bit.
perfect.
Because,
That's been my biggest work in relationships by far lately. My relationship with the masculine, I've healed a lot there, but it's like right now you and I are in the same wavelength, girl. I'm
yeah.
going into that stuff too, and really working with some of my female friends too, being really open in the same way that I was with some of my male friends before I met my partner, being really open about what's going on and how I'm feeling, and vice versa, and working on this together, because I really believe that we heal those wounds in relationship, in the current context. And sometimes it's like you said, dipping the toe in. I love that. I absolutely love that. Because you can also kind of overwhelm the nervous system if you try to dive too deep all at once. And it's almost like, for me, it would be like, I just experience a shutdown, and then I'd go into whatever mode, whatever part that, the role, like you called it, the role that I'm playing. And then you don't get anywhere,
Yeah.
So it's like, if you really want it to be a different kind of connection, it's like, sometimes I tell people, like, okay, like, I'm feeling your bubble, and it's okay to have that, or your wall or whatever. But like, what if you could let in, like, if I poked a tiny little hole with like a pin, and you could let just a tiny bit of like this presence that I'm giving you right now come through, just like that much. And if you can't, that's fine too.
Mm-hmm.
But if you can, like, just play with that and see what part of you can receive that, And it sometimes it's one of those things where it's like, baby step, baby step, baby step, baby step, huge jump,
Mm-hmm.
it kind of like happens right away, like you're ready for it, kind of thing.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with that, because when it came to, for me, like more romantic relationship, the reason why I find it so difficult, because I will be like, yes, let's do it, let's go for it, and then dive in, and then another part of me was like, no, hell no, and then
Yeah.
another would come up and take over, and then later on you think like, why did I do that, and then it kind of comes up, because that part of you is like, no, we're not just going to dive in, it's too much, so
Yes.
it's also to, I think it's kind of respect, to also respect that part of yourself that might want to take it a little bit more slow. And usually that
Yeah.
part actually has really good reasons for it. It's not just
Oh yeah.
something that's in the way. No, it's like, oh, I want to make sure someone is safe, and that it really is right, that you can have also moments
Yes.
to reflect back
Yes.
on it. Instead of,
Yes. It's
oh my
always
god,
a
this
good reason.
part is in a way of me getting a relationship. It's a completely different view on it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. There's always a good reason, and that it's there. And there's always like a positive intention that it has. And what I really like to teach people, or show people how to do and walk through it with them, is how to use those triggers that come up inside of a relationship, instead of like, oh my God, it's so annoying. It's like, yes, this is where the gold is. That's going to like make my relationship freaking awesome, or that's going to make me ready for the right relationship, the best relationship that feels best for me, is to go into those triggers and work with them, but you got to know how, and you got to have support.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
Yeah.
because it kind of gets like mirrored back to you. And
Oh yeah. Oh yeah,
yeah.
exactly. I mean, I used to date guys that made me feel, not all of them, but they usually made me feel like my father made me feel. You know what I mean? Like, usually it felt like there was some weird, covertly abusive psychological stuff going on. I felt like I was a hollow body for people to use. I'm sorry, that's like really dark language, but like that is how it felt, you know? And it just wasn't emotionally safe. And the men that I was attracted to, even when I started really doing this deep work with my inner child and going into my childhood wounding and my attachment trauma, the type of men that I even was attracted to started to change. Like, I used to think safe was like boring. I was like, oh, like, he's boring. Like, this relationship sucks. Like, I need somebody that's going to make me feel anxious, like at a level 15,000. You know what I mean? Because that's what I thought love felt like. And I thought it was supposed to hurt. And I thought it was supposed to be so intense and charged that it was like this like high and then a roller coaster where it was a low. And I didn't know what it would feel like. I didn't know how to welcome in a connection that actually felt safe and stable, you know? But it changed. So it's really incredible how this work can kind of repattern your brain and your entire experience. Like you said, you'll attract new things, different things. Works with friendships too, works with business too, all kinds of things. It's an inside job.
Yeah, it's all relationships, so in
All of
different
it.
forms. Yeah. And also, would you maybe have some last advice for people who want to feel more safe in a relationship? So some things that helped you, or we've noticed that helped other people you work with?
Yeah, I mean, I would say showing up for your inner child and making that relationship priority one is probably the biggest piece of advice I could give, because there's a lot of other things you can do. I recommend having friendships that you're connected to at the same time as you're dating, so that you can still feel like, start with those friendships or even a therapist to start to feel more secure and safe in your connections. So, you know, so you feel safe to explore with someone new. There's lots of other, I mean, I have so many tips and tools, but I think for me, like, that's just number one. That relationship for me always has to be number one. And it's, I mean, a lot of people say it's like, you know, your relationship with your higher power, but, you know, I also feel like I don't have to work as hard at that relationship, because like I'm always loved, and it's just, you know, I'm blocked from connecting to it. And like, why am I blocked? Why am I blocked from connecting with someone else? You know, it's because of this relationship, you know? So like, I would say, get to know your own heart, how it feels and what it wants and what it needs. And when the triggers come out and you feel unsafe, like, you know, yes, ask for what you need, but number one, like, feel into the inner child that's talking to you and what they need. And if, you know, and prioritize that above anything else. And realize that it's not usually about the other person, it's usually about that.
Yeah, that's very important.
And I say usually, I mean not always.
Yeah,
it doesn't mean there's not outer action that's necessary, but ultimately,
yeah, but then when you go and look at it, when there is outer action needed, it will also become clear.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's exactly what. Because I like to talk about it. It's like we walk around wearing trauma goggles. I don't know if you've ever seen like beer goggles. You put them on and it's like really blurry and out of focus. It's like a joke. It's supposed to simulate, you know, when you're drunk, when you've had too much beer. But it's like trauma goggles are really similar. Like, you see things and they're distorted, right? And it was so hard for me to pick through what is my projection and what is real in a situation, especially in a relationship, for me, especially in a relationship with a man. And when I would go inside and, you know, I would be like, oh my God, like, I'm predominantly like an anxious style when I'm in relationships, especially with men. So I'd be like, oh my God, why isn't he texting me back? Like, like by my phone, just like watching. And I had to learn how to turn off the phone, put the phone face down on the table and go inside. And instead of going towards him, go towards her.
Mm.
You know, so that would be my number one piece of advice for people.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think it's great advice. And if anyone is really interested in your work and what you do and wants to know more about it, how can they find you?
Oh, yeah. So I have a website, juliaphoenix11.com, and you can book a consultation through the website. I have a YouTube channel as well, Julia Phoenix 11. So you can maybe find me there. I've got a Facebook group that's really active, Julia's Inner Child Playground and Healing Community. I do live Q&As and a lot of live videos there. So that's a neat place to come and find me. And yeah, if you want to send me a message, like find me on Facebook and send me a message, and we'll, if you're interested in doing some one-on-one work, especially if you're interested in doing this work of relationships, I'm centering my business, and I'm focusing my business primarily on relationships, because as we talked about today, it's everything. So if you want to do some relationship work, we can talk about it and what that would look like. You can private message me or book a consultation through my website, juliaphoenix11.com.
Okay, great. And I also put a link in the description as well to make it a bit easier. Yeah, and Julia, I just want to thank you so much for being here today and being so open and sharing everything. So thank you.
Thank you, Sanne. It's my pleasure. It was wonderful. You're amazing.
Thank you. And also thank everyone for listening as well, and wishing you a beautiful week. Bye.